Hi, welcome back. Our last lesson was on simultaneous shift in the supply and demand curves. This is where we analyze what happened to equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity when both the demand and the supply curve shift simultaneously. Today we'll be looking at price elasticity of demand. Now, the law of demand tells us that when the price of a good falls, the quantity demanded will rise. And when the price of a good rises, the quantity demand will fall. But the important question is by how much? By how much will the quantity demand change when the price changes? That is where price elasticity of demand comes in. Now, the price elasticity of demand, it measures how responsive buyers are to the price changes. When you go into the market to buy apples and the price increases from 2 to 3, you might adjust your demand. Or if the price were to fall from 3 to 2, you adjust your demand. But by how much will you adjust your demand when the price changes? That is what price elasticity measures. Now, to calculate price elasticity, the formula is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. We can use what we call the midpoint formula to calculate the price elasticity of demand. And this is what is shown here. Now, let's use a simple example in the market of apples to calculate price elasticity of demand. So assume that price of apple was 5 and quantity demand was 10. Now, if the price increased from 5 to 7, quantity demand reduces from 10 to 4. Now, P1 here just shows the previous price and P2 shows the new price or the current price. Q1 shows previous quantity or the old quantity demanded at the old price. And Q2 here just shows the current quantity demand or the new quantity demand at the new price. Let's first calculate the percentage change in quantity demanded. So using our formula, Q2 is 4 minus Q1, which is 10, divided by Q1, which is 10, plus Q2, which is 4, divided by 2, times 100. Now, this gives us minus 6 divided by 7 times 100, and it's approximately 86%. Now, let's calculate the percentage change in price. P2 here is 7 minus P1, which is 5, divided by P1, which is 5, plus P2, which is 7, divided by 2, multiplied by 100. This gives us 2 divided by 6 times 100, which is approximately 33%. Now, to calculate a price elasticity of demand, we need to divide the percentage change in quantity by the percentage change in price. Percentage change in quantity is minus 86% and percentage change in price is 33%. This gives us an approximate value of minus 2.6. Now, the price elasticity of demand is negative, just showing us that there's a negative relationship between price and quantity, as shown by the law of demand. But the absolute value of price elasticity focuses on the magnitude of the price elasticity. So that is what we will be focusing on here. So in interpreting the price elasticity to find whether it is elastic, inelastic, or unitary elastic, we need to focus on the absolute value. So based on our calculation here, the absolute value of minus 2.6 is 2.6. Now that we know how to calculate the price elasticity, let's look at the various interpretations of the various price elasticities. Now, the first type is elastic. When we say that the price elasticity of demand is relatively elastic, it means that quantity demanded is very responsive to changes in price. So when the price of a good falls, quantity demand will rise by a greater percentage. Or when the price of a good rises, quantity demand will fall by a greater percentage. And if you were to calculate a price elasticity of demand, you'll get an example, something like minus 60% divided by 40%, which will be an absolute value of minus 1.5. This is equal to 1.5, greater than 1. Now, what this shows here is that if price were to change by 40%, quantity demand will change by 60%. So quantity demand changes by a bigger proportion than a change in price. And whenever you calculate price elasticity and it's greater than 1, when the absolute value is greater than 1, then it means that it's elastic. So quantity demand is more responsive than changes in price. Now let's move on to inelastic. When quantity demand is very unresponsive to changes in price, then the demand is inelastic. For example, if you calculate price elasticity, you might get something like 40% for quantity demand changes versus 60% for price changes. And this is going to give you an absolute value of minus 0.67, which is 0.67, and this is less than 1. What this means here is that if price were to change by 60%, quantity demand will change by a smaller proportion, something smaller than 60%, and in this case 40%. So it means the changes in price are much bigger than the changes in quantity demanded. And when you calculate a price elasticity and it's less than 1, it means demand is inelastic. Changes in price induces a smaller change in quantity demanded. And then the final type of elasticity is unitary elastic, when the change in price is the same as the change in quantity demanded. So quantity demand and price will change by the same proportion or the same percentage. An example of this will be a price elasticity which is probably 40% change in quantity demand versus 40% change in price. And this will give us a value equal to 1. So when you calculate a price elasticity that is equal to 1, then it is unitary elastic. What this means is that whatever percentage the price changes by, quantity demand will also change by the same percentage. So if price were to reduce by 40%, quantity demand will increase by 40%. If price were to reduce by 80%, quantity demand will also increase by 80%. Now that we know the various types of price elasticities, let's look at the elastic and inelastic curves. Now, generally, elastic demand curves are relatively flatter than inelastic demand curves. So, for instance, for elastic demand curve, when you draw your curve, you might have something that looks like that. So, assuming price were 3 and your quantity demand was 4, if price reduces to 2, quantity demand might increase to 7. So you see that the decrease in price here is a much smaller proportion as compared to the increase in quantity demand. So this is how an elastic curve looks like. Any change in price induces a much bigger change in quantity demanded. So the flip side is the inelastic curve, which is steeper. So you have a curve that looks like this. So if price were to be 3 and quantity demand was 4 and price reduced to 2, quantity demand will also reduce to maybe 4.5. You see that this reduction in price is much bigger than the increase in quantity demand. So what this means is that any change in price will induce a smaller change in quantity demanded. Now, there are two extreme cases when we talk about price elasticity of demand. It's not just relatively elastic or relatively inelastic. The two extreme cases are perfectly inelastic and perfectly elastic. Let's first look at what we mean by perfectly elastic demand. So for perfectly elastic demand, any change in price leads to an infinite change in quantity. So the price elasticity is infinite. When you draw a price elasticity curve, when you draw a demand curve for a perfectly elastic demand, you have a curve that is horizontal. So this will be our horizontal demand curve. What this curve shows is that the least change in price will cause an infinite change in quantity demanded. So quantity demanded is very sensitive to changes in price. Now the next example or the next case is perfectly inelastic demand. Perfectly inelastic demand means that no matter what the change in price is, the total quantity demand remains unchanged. So in this case, price elasticity is 0. So when you draw your demand curve for inelastic demand, you have a vertical demand curve. So this is our vertical demand curve. So at any price, if price were to be 2, quantity demand will, let's say example, 100. If price increased to 3, quantity demand is still 100. If price increased to 4, quantity demand still remains 100. No matter the change in price, quantity demand remains unchanged. Versus perfectly elastic, where any change in price will lead to an infinite change in quantity demanded. So this is all that we have for our lesson on price elasticity of demand. Our next lesson will be looking at the determinant of price elasticity of demand. If you enjoyed today's lesson, consider subscribing. Thank you.